All the waiters ran from the arrogant millionaire until the waitress stood up to him. The amber light of Manhattan's late afternoon sun filtered through the frosted glass doors of the Golden Fork, casting elongated shadows across the pristine marble floors. Maya Rodriguez smoothed her crisp white apron one final time, her fingers lingering over the silver nameplate that bore a lie. Maya R. Student. If only they knew. The restaurant hummed with its usual symphony of wealth, crystal glasses chiming against fine china, the soft murmur of power lunches dissolving into evening affairs, the rustle of silk and cashmere as Manhattan's elite settled into their preferred hunting grounds. Maya had learned to navigate this world like a chameleon, blending seamlessly into the background while her trained eyes catalogued every detail that mattered. 3 months of this elaborate charade, and she'd gathered enough evidence to fill a prosecutor's wet dreams: unpaid overtime, health code violations, systematic intimidation of workers who dared speak up. But Marcus Delacroix, the Golden Fork's slick-haired manager, remained careful, too careful. She needed something bigger, something undeniable. Maya, Sophia's voice cut through her thoughts. Her best friend emerged from the kitchen's swinging doors, chef's coat stained with the honest work of feeding people who probably spent more on a single meal than most families earned in a month. You're doing that thing again. What thing? That lawyer thing. You get this look when you're building a case. Sophia's dark eyes narrowed with concern. Remember, you're supposed to be a struggling Columbia student, not Erin Brockovich. Maya forced her shoulders to relax, slipping back into the role that had become second nature. Just tired. Marcus has been... The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations died mid-sentence. The clatter of silverware ceased. Even the ambient jazz seemed to lower its volume, as if the very air had been commanded to submit. Alexander Stone had arrived. He moved through the Golden Fork like a predator who'd never encountered prey he couldn't devour. 6 feet of tailored perfection wrapped in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was swept back with casual precision, and those steel-gray eyes surveyed the room with the detached interest of a king reviewing his subjects. Conversations resumed in hushed, reverential tones, but Maya noticed how every server suddenly found urgent tasks that took them anywhere but near table 7, his table. God, I hate that man, Sophia muttered, disappearing back into the kitchen before Alexander's gaze could find her. Maya watched, fascinated despite herself, as the elaborate dance of avoidance began. James, a seasoned waiter with 15 years' experience, suddenly developed an urgent need to polish already spotless wine glasses. Carmen claimed she had to take inventory. Even Marcus, usually eager to personally attend to their most profitable customer, seemed conveniently occupied with paperwork, which left Thomas Brennan was 19, freckled, and possessed the kind of earnest optimism that Manhattan hadn't yet managed to crush. He'd started at the Golden Fork 6 weeks ago, desperate to pay for community college classes and support his younger sister after their father's construction accident. Maya had grown protective of him. This kid who still believed hard work and honest effort would be enough. She watched Tommy approach table 7 with the careful steps of a condemned man walking to the gallows. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the sterling silver water glass, and Maya's chest tightened with familiar anger. Finally, Alexander's voice carried across the dining room with casual disdain. I was beginning to think this establishment had forgotten how to provide basic service. Tommy's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. I'm sorry, Mr. Stone, how may I? You may start by explaining why I've been sitting here for... Alexander made a show of checking his Patek Philippe. 3 minutes without so much as an acknowledgement. Do you have any idea what my time is worth? The question hung in the air like a blade. Maya felt her carefully constructed cover slipping as her hands clenched into fists. Around them, the other diners pretended not to watch while hanging on every word of the familiar spectacle. I apologize, sir. The usual vodka martini, extra dry, with, did I ask for my drink order? Alexander's voice remained conversational, which somehow made it worse. I asked you a question about my time. I'll give you a hint. It's more than you'll make in your entire pathetic existence. Tommy's face flushed crimson. Maya saw his hands shake as he fumbled with his order pad, and something inside her chest cracked like thin ice under pressure. Perhaps, she said, stepping forward before her rational mind could stop her, your time would be better spent learning basic human decency instead of calculating your net worth per second. The silence that followed was absolute. 30 conversations stopped mid-syllable. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The jazz quartet might as well have been playing to an empty room. Alexander Stone's steel-gray eyes shifted to her with the slow, predatory focus of a shark scenting blood in the water. Maya felt the weight of that gaze like a physical force, but she held her ground, chin raised, every inch of her 5'6" frame radiating defiance. "Excuse me." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You heard me." Maya stepped closer to table 7, her server's smile replaced by something far more formidable. "This young man is trying to do his job, a job that, by the way, directly serves you. The least you could do is treat him with the same respect you'd expect from others." Alexander rose slowly from his chair, and Maya realized for the first time just how imposing he was. But she'd faced down hostile judges and corporate attorneys. She wasn't about to be intimidated by an overgrown trust fund baby with a god complex. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" he asked, his voice carrying the soft menace of someone accustomed to absolute deference, someone who's apparently forgotten that money can't buy class. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, carrying every ounce of frustration she'd swallowed over 3 months of watching workers like Tommy be ground down by people exactly like Alexander Stone. The collective intake of breath from nearby tables was audible. Maya caught sight of Marcus rushing toward them, his face pale with panic, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. "You want to know what your time is worth, Mr. Stone. It's worth exactly as much as his." She gestured toward Tommy, who stood frozen in shock. "Or mine, or anyone else's in this room. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to make our way in the world. The only difference is some of us remember how to treat others with dignity." For a long moment, Alexander Stone stared at her as if she were some exotic species he'd never encountered. His eyes, which had seemed cold as winter steel, now held something different. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a note she couldn't quite identify. "That's the first interesting thing anyone's said to me in months." Maya blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. "Maya," Marcus's voice cracked like a whip as he finally reached them. "What on earth do you think you're—" "Mr. Stone, I'm so terribly sorry. This behavior is completely unacceptable, and I assure you there will be consequences." "Actually," Alexander said, settling back into his chair with fluid grace, "I'd like her to take my table." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Sir?" "You heard me." Alexander's eyes never left Maya's face. "I believe I've found my server for the evening." Marcus looked like he might faint. Tommy stood slack-jawed, forgotten in the wake of this unexpected turn, and Maya found herself staring into those steel-gray eyes, wondering what game Alexander Stone thought he was playing, and whether she was brave enough to find out. The next evening arrived with the weight of unfinished business. Maya's hands moved through the familiar ritual of preparation, adjusting her apron, checking her notepad, steeling herself for another performance. But tonight felt different. The memory of Alexander Stone's final words echoed in her mind like a challenge she couldn't decode. "I believe I've found my server for the evening." What game was he playing? The golden fork buzzed with its usual evening energy, but Maya caught the sideways glances from her co-workers, the hushed conversations that stopped when she passed. Word traveled fast in the service industry, and her confrontation with Manhattan's most notorious diner had apparently reached legendary status overnight. "You realize you're completely insane, right?" Sophia emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of canapes, her expression mixing admiration with concern. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Maya busied herself with straightening already perfect silverware. "I stood up for Tommy. Anyone would have—" "No, Maya, anyone should have, but no one would have." Sophia set down her tray and lowered her voice. "Alexander Stone could buy this place 10 times over and shut it down for sport. He could ruin your life with a phone call. Then why didn't he?" The question hung between them, unanswered and troubling. Maya had spent the sleepless night dissecting every moment of their encounter, searching for hidden motives, manipulative tactics, anything that fit her carefully constructed image of who Alexander Stone was supposed to be. But all she could remember was that moment of genuine surprise in his eyes, as if she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. "Maya." Marcus materialized beside them like a bad omen, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "Mr. Stone specifically requested you again tonight. Table 7, 8 o'clock sharp." Her stomach performed an unwelcome somersault. "He's here. Not yet. But when he arrives..." Marcus's voice carried a warning wrapped in desperation. Whatever happened yesterday, whatever spell you cast, just keep him happy. The Golden Fork can't afford to lose his business. As if summoned by their conversation, the familiar hush fell over the restaurant. Alexander Stone stepped through the entrance with the same commanding presence. But tonight Maya noticed details she'd missed before. The way his shoulders carried tension despite his confident stride. The practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. The careful distance he maintained from everyone around him. He moved to table 7 without acknowledging anyone else, settling into his chair with fluid grace. Then those steel-gray eyes found hers across the dining room, and Maya felt the strange pull of a gravitational force she couldn't name. She approached his table with measured steps, notepad in hand, every nerve ending on high alert. "Good evening, Mr. Stone." Ms. Rodriguez. Her name on his lips sounded different than she'd expected. Less dismissive, more curious. "I wasn't sure you'd have the courage to face me again." Maya raised an eyebrow, slipping into the familiar armor of professional courtesy. "You requested me specifically. It would have been rude to decline." Rude, he seemed to taste the word. An interesting concept from someone who lectured me about dignity in front of half of Manhattan's social elite. "Are you here for an apology?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Carrying more challenge than she'd intended, Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with unsettling intensity. "Actually, I'm here because I can't remember the last time someone surprised me. You have a gift for that, it seems." Maya felt off balance, like she was playing chess with someone who'd changed the rules without telling her. "Your usual martini. Tell me something first." He ignored her attempt to return to safer professional ground. "What's a Columbia student doing defending labor rights with the precision of a seasoned attorney?" The blood in Maya's veins turned to ice water. Had he somehow discovered her real identity? She forced her expression to remain neutral. Years of courtroom training kicking in automatically. "I believe in treating people fairly. You don't need a law degree for basic human decency." "No," he agreed. "But the way you cited workplace dignity principles yesterday suggested more than casual knowledge." Maya's mind raced. How much did he actually know? How much was fishing expedition? "I read a lot. Pre-law students tend to be familiar with basic employment rights." "Pre-law," Alexander nodded slowly. "That explains the fire in your eyes when you see injustice. I imagine you have plans to change the world." Despite every instinct screaming warnings, Maya found herself drawn into the conversation. There was something in his tone, not mockery, but genuine curiosity, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that fascinated him. "Someone has to," she said simply. "And you think the legal system is the answer, that you can fight inequality with paperwork and precedent." The cynicism in his voice sparked her anger. "Better than accepting it? Better than using wealth as an excuse to treat people like disposable commodities?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the white tablecloth. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, something almost vulnerable. "What if I told you that some of us didn't choose our circumstances, that sometimes wealth is more prison than privilege?" Maya blinked, startled by the unexpected honesty. For a moment, the mask of arrogant superiority slipped, and she glimpsed something raw beneath. Loneliness, perhaps, or a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. "Then I'd say that's no excuse for making other people's lives harder," she replied, but the fire had gone out of her voice. "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was quite ready to cross. Maya found herself studying his face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculated charm, but all she saw was a man who seemed as surprised by his own honesty as she was. "Your martini," she said finally, falling back on the safety of routine. "Actually, I think I'd prefer wine tonight. Something red. Choose for me." Maya hesitated. "I don't know your preferences." "Then surprise me again," she returned 10 minutes later with a bottle of Barolo. Rich, complex, with enough backbone to match his personality but elegant enough to appeal to refined tastes. Alexander examined the label with raised eyebrows. Ambitious choice. Most people would have played it safe with a Cabernet. "You said to surprise you." He poured the wine with practiced ease, then did something that caught her completely off guard. He poured a second glass and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit. I can't. I'm working. I'm your only table tonight." Marcus made sure of that. His eyes held a challenge. "Unless you're afraid." Maya glanced around the restaurant. Several diners were watching with barely concealed fascination, and she could see Marcus hovering near the bar, looking like he might faint. Professional suicide or not, she couldn't back down from a direct challenge. She slid into the chair, acutely aware of the breach in protocol, the whispered conversations starting up around them. "This is highly irregular. So was yesterday." Alexander raised his glass. 2 irregular encounters. Maya lifted her wine, their glasses meeting with a soft chime. The Barolo was perfect, bold and complex, with layers that revealed themselves slowly, like the man across from her. She realized with uncomfortable clarity. "Tell me about Columbia," Alexander said, settling back in his chair. "What draws someone to law school?" The lie came easily after months of practice. "My parents worked their whole lives and never got ahead. They deserved better representation, better advocacy. I want to be that voice for families like mine." It wasn't entirely false, just incomplete. Her parents had worked crushing hours for minimal pay, had been cheated by employers and ignored by a system designed to protect those with means. The difference was that Maya had already become that voice, had already spent 3 years fighting those battles in courtrooms across the city. "Admirable," Alexander said, and she detected no sarcasm. "And after graduation, public defender's office, legal aid, something like that." Maya took another sip of wine, using the moment to study him. "What about you? Was business empire building always the dream?" Something flickered across his features, too quick to identify, but it looked like pain. "Dreams are luxuries some of us can't afford. I inherited responsibility before I was old enough to have dreams." The vulnerability in his voice was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the familiar armor of casual sophistication. But Maya had heard it, and it changed something fundamental in how she saw him. They talked for another hour, carefully, like diplomats from warring nations finding unexpected common ground. Alexander was more intelligent than she'd expected. His cynicism tempered by flashes of idealism, he seemed almost embarrassed to reveal, when he spoke about the burden of inherited wealth, the isolation of always being seen as a bank account, rather than a person. Maya found herself forgetting that he was supposed to be the enemy. When he finally called for the check, Alexander left a tip that was generous without being ostentatious. Exactly 20%, the kind of respectful gesture that acknowledged good service without turning it into charity. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Maya asked as he stood to leave, the question escaping before she could stop it. Alexander paused, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Would you like me to be?" The honest answer terrified her. Instead, she gave him the professional smile she'd perfected over months of playing her role. "Have a good evening, Mr. Stone." He studied her for another moment, then nodded. "Until tomorrow, Miss Rodriguez." As she watched him leave, Maya realized that everything had changed. Alexander Stone was no longer just a target for her investigation. He was becoming a person, complex and contradictory and dangerously fascinating, and that was exactly the kind of complication she couldn't afford. By the 5th consecutive evening, Alexander Stone's presence at Table 7 had become as predictable as the sunset over the Hudson River. Maya found herself anticipating his arrival with a mixture of professional curiosity and something far more dangerous. Genuine interest tonight. She watched him from across the dining room as he settled into his usual chair, noting the way his shoulders seemed less rigid than when she'd first confronted him. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Maya had trained herself to notice details others missed. It was a skill that served her well in both the courtroom and her current masquerade. "You realize half the staff thinks you've cast some kind of spell on him," Sophia whispered as they polished wine glasses behind the bar. "Carmen's convinced you're secretly some kind of Manhattan socialite playing dress-up." Maya glanced toward the kitchen where Carmen was preparing appetizers, her movements sharp with barely concealed resentment. The older woman had worked at the Golden Fork for 12 years, enduring Alexander's disdain with the weary resignation of someone who couldn't afford to fight back. Maya's sudden elevation to his preferred server had shifted the delicate ecosystem of restaurant politics in ways she was still learning to navigate. What does Marcus think? Marcus thinks you're either brilliant or completely insane, and he can't decide which would be worse for his blood pressure. Sophia set down her glass and fixed Maya with a serious look. "But what I think matters more. This is getting complicated, isn't it?" The question hit closer to home than Maya cared to admit. Her investigation had stalled as her evenings became consumed by increasingly complex conversations with Alexander. Instead of gathering evidence of exploitation, she found herself learning about his childhood isolation, his parents' death in a car accident when he was barely out of college, the crushing weight of inherited expectations. "He's not what I expected," Maya admitted quietly. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Before Maya could respond, Tommy approached the bar with nervous energy radiating from every step. Since the incident with Alexander, the younger man had been different, more confident in some ways, but also more watchful, as if he'd glimpsed something about the restaurant's dynamics that he hadn't understood before. Maya, he said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Can I talk to you after your shift? There's something you should know. About what? Tommy's eyes darted toward Marcus's office, where their manager was visible through the glass partition, hunched over his computer with unusual intensity. About how things really work here. About Marcus, and the way he handles problems. Maya felt her investigative instincts sharpen like a blade finding its edge. What kind of problems? Not here, Tommy said quickly as Marcus looked up from his screen. After closing, it's important. As Tommy retreated to his section, Maya's mind raced with possibilities. 3 months of careful observation had yielded hints of irregularities. Workers clocking out while still serving tables, health benefits mysteriously denied, suspicious cash transactions in Marcus's office, but nothing concrete enough to build a case, if Tommy had insider knowledge. Mrs. Rodriguez, Alexander's voice drew her back to the present. He stood beside the bar with that particular stillness that seemed to command attention without demanding it. Tonight he wore a navy suit that emphasized the gray in his eyes, and Maya found herself noticing details she had no business noticing. The way his dark hair caught the ambient light, the barely perceptible scar along his left temple. Mr. Stone, your usual table is ready. Actually, I was hoping you might join me for dinner properly tonight as a guest, not a server. The suggestion hit Maya like a physical blow. Around them, the restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade into white static. I couldn't possibly. Why not? Your shift ends in an hour. I've already arranged it with Marcus. Maya's gaze snapped to the manager's office, where Marcus was now watching them with an expression of barely contained panic. The idea of spending an evening with Alexander outside the safe parameters of professional service terrified her on multiple levels. It was dangerous to her cover, dangerous to her investigation, and, most dangerous of all, appealing in ways that had nothing to do with either. I don't think that would be appropriate, she said, falling back on professional courtesy. Since when do you worry about appropriate? Alexander's mouth quirked upward in what might have been amusement. The woman who lectured me about human dignity in front of half of Manhattan is concerned about dinner protocol. He had a point, and they both knew it. Maya found herself caught between the character she was playing and the person she actually was, unsure which one should respond. Besides, Alexander continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I have a proposition that might interest you, something that could benefit people like Tommy. Maya's investigative instincts went into overdrive. Was this an opening? A chance to learn more about his connections, his business practices, perhaps even evidence of the corruption she'd been trying to uncover? What kind of proposition? Dinner first. Then we talk. An hour later, Maya found herself seated across from Alexander at a corner table she'd never served. The familiar weight of her apron replaced by the simple black dress Sophia had insisted she borrow. The transformation felt like stepping into someone else's skin, which, she supposed, was exactly what she'd been doing for months. Alexander had been true to his word about treating her as a guest. No special treatment. No obvious displays of wealth or influence. Just two people sharing a meal and conversation that flowed with surprising ease. You grew up in Queens? He asked as their appetizers arrived. Maya nodded, sticking to the carefully constructed backstory she'd developed. Astoria? My parents ran a small grocery store until the rent got too high. That must have been difficult, watching them struggle. There was genuine empathy in his voice, and Maya felt an uncomfortable pang of guilt. Her parents had indeed struggled, had worked double shifts and sacrificed everything for their children's education, but they'd also lived to see her graduate law school, to attend her first victory in court. They'd died knowing their daughter had made it. They wanted something better for their children, she said, which was true enough. What about you? What was it like growing up with all this? Alexander's expression grew distant. Lonely, mostly. My parents were always traveling, always working. I spent more time with nannies and boarding school administrators than with family. Is that why you? Maya hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question without sounding accusatory. Why I treat service workers badly, Alexander finished for her. You want to know if I was raised to believe I was better than everyone else? Were you? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. swirling the wine in his glass with practiced precision. I was raised to believe that wealth came with responsibility, that privilege was earned through achievement. But somewhere along the way, I think I confused having more with being more. The admission was so unexpected, so quietly vulnerable, that Maya felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire she'd prepared to despise. This was a man examining his own flaws with uncomfortable honesty. "And now," she asked softly, "now I'm beginning to think I've been wrong about a lot of things." His eyes met hers across the table, starting with the assumption that wealth and character are correlated. They were interrupted by the arrival of their main courses, but the conversation continued to flow around topics that surprised Maya with their depth. Alexander spoke about the isolation of inherited wealth, the way people either feared him or wanted something from him, the difficulty of forming genuine connections when every interaction was colored by his bank account. Maya found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her fictional struggles as a Columbia student, her carefully fabricated dreams of fighting for workers' rights. The lies came easily, seasoned with enough truth to feel authentic. As the evening progressed, Maya realized she was enjoying herself in ways that had nothing to do with her investigation. Alexander was intelligent, well-read, and possessed a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. When he spoke about art, literature, or philosophy, his entire demeanor changed, the defensive arrogance replaced by genuine passion. "You mentioned a proposition," Maya said, as their dessert plates were cleared away. Alexander's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about what you said, about dignity and respect, about the way I've treated people." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I want to do better, but I need help understanding how." "What kind of help?" "I want to fund a program for restaurant workers, education assistance, healthcare support, legal advocacy, but I need someone who understands their needs, someone they trust." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "I want you to help me design it." Maya felt her world tilt on its axis. This was the last thing she'd expected, an offer that aligned perfectly with everything she actually believed in, everything she'd dedicated her career to fighting for. The irony was almost too painful to bear. "I'm just a student. You're not just anything," Alexander interrupted with quiet intensity. "You have insight, passion, intelligence. You see injustices that I've been blind to my entire life." The compliment hit harder than it should have, complicated by the knowledge that everything he thought he knew about her was a lie. Maya felt the familiar weight of her double life pressing down like a physical force. "I'd need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," Alexander signaled for the check. "But Maya, can I call you Maya?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Whatever you decide, thank you for showing me that there's another way to see the world, for proving that someone could look at me and see more than just a bank account." As he walked her to a taxi later that evening, Maya realized that her investigation had taken a turn she'd never anticipated. She was no longer just gathering evidence against Alexander Stone. She was beginning to understand him, to see the complexity beneath the arrogant facade. And that understanding was becoming the most dangerous thing of all. The invitation arrived at the Golden Fork on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Maya stared at the elegant script, her heart performing an unwelcome percussion solo against her ribs. "The pleasure of your company is requested at a charity gala benefiting the Manhattan Children's Foundation. Saturday evening, 8 o'clock, penthouse of Alexander Stone, 432 Park Avenue." A handwritten note was attached in what she now recognized as Alexander's distinctive penmanship. "I meant what I said about seeing the world differently. Perhaps you'd like to see my world and help me understand how to change it. You're going, aren't you?" Sophia appeared beside her, reading the invitation over her shoulder with an expression of mingled fascination and horror. Maya folded the card carefully, slipping it into her apron pocket like a secret she wasn't ready to examine. "It's just research, a chance to observe how the other half lives, understand the systems I'm trying to expose." "Is that what you're calling it now?" Sophia's dark eyes held the kind of knowing that came from years of friendship. "Research." Before Maya could formulate a response that wouldn't sound like a lie, to Sophia or to herself, Tommy approached with the nervous energy that had become his signature since their conversation about Marcus's problem-handling methods. "Maya, did you get my message? About meeting after closing?" She had gotten the message, along with a dozen others over the past week. Each time, something had prevented their conversation. Marcus working late, unexpected health inspections, or simply the exhaustion that came from maintaining her elaborate deception while navigating increasingly complex emotions around Alexander Stone. "Tonight," she promised. "After the last table clears." Tommy nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Just be careful, okay? There are things about this place, about Marcus, that you don't understand yet." As Tommy retreated to his section, Maya felt the familiar weight of secrets pressing down from all directions: her investigation, her growing feelings for Alexander, her fictional identity. All of it was becoming a house of cards built in a hurricane. Saturday evening found Maya standing in Sophia's cramped apartment, surrounded by the debris of an impromptu styling session. Dresses were draped over every available surface, shoes scattered across the floor like expensive landmines. "This is insane," Maya muttered, adjusting the neckline of a midnight blue cocktail dress that Sophia had borrowed from her cousin who worked in fashion. "I don't belong at a Manhattan charity gala. You belong wherever you choose to be," Sophia replied firmly, applying the finishing touches to Maya's makeup with professional precision. "Besides, you're not going as Maya Rodriguez, struggling student. You're going as Maya Rodriguez, future advocate for workers' rights. There's a difference." Maya studied her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The dress transformed her from invisible service worker to someone who could hold her own in Alexander's rarefied world. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue existed in a stratosphere Maya had only imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan spread out like a glittering circuit board. While inside, the city's elite mingled with the casual elegance of people who'd never questioned their right to be there. Maya moved through the crowd with careful steps, hyper-aware of every word, every gesture, every potential misstep that could expose her as an intruder in this rarefied air. She'd studied these people from a distance, served their tables, documented their behaviors, but she'd never tried to join their ranks. "You came." Alexander's voice materialized beside her like a warm current in cold water. Tonight he wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the sharp angles of his face, but it was his smile, genuine and slightly surprised, that made Maya's breath catch. "I said I would. You also said you needed time to think about my proposition, have you?" Maya accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "I've been researching workers' rights programs. There are some interesting models in other cities." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been researching, though her focus was less on designing programs and more on understanding the legal frameworks that could be used to prosecute the kind of systemic abuse she suspected at the Golden Fork. "Excellent. There are some people here tonight I'd like you to meet, potential allies in making real change." For the next hour, Alexander guided her through conversations with politicians, non-profit directors, and other philanthropists. Maya found herself speaking with increasing confidence about workers' rights, drawing on her years of legal experience, while carefully maintaining her fictional identity as a passionate student. "You're impressive," said Councilwoman Patricia Vega after a particularly heated discussion about minimum wage legislation. "Have you considered running for office yourself?" Maya deflected with a laugh, but not before catching Alexander's admiring glance. The look in his eyes, pride, respect, something deeper, sent warmth spreading through her chest in ways that had nothing to do with the champagne. As the evening progressed, Maya realized she was seeing a different side of Alexander's world. Yes, there was obscene wealth and casual privilege, but there was also genuine commitment to social causes, thoughtful discussion of complex issues, and, most surprisingly, deference to her opinions on topics where her supposed student research gave her expertise. "Can I show you something?" Alexander asked during a lull in the conversation. He led her away from the main gathering to a quieter section of the penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls and comfortable leather chairs created intimate conversation nooks. The contrast with the glamorous party space was striking. This felt lived in, personal. "This is beautiful," Maya said, running her fingers along the spine of a first-edition Steinbeck. "My parents' collection. I used to hide here when I was young, reading instead of attending whatever social function they deemed appropriate for my age." Alexander's voice carried the weight of old memories. "I always felt more at home with books than with people. And now?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "Now, I'm beginning to think I might have been hiding for the wrong reasons." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Maya felt the dangerous pull of genuine connection, the temptation to drop her guard and respond with equal honesty. "Alexander," she began, then stopped as her phone buzzed with an urgent text message. "Emergency at the restaurant. Marcus knows something. Be careful." The ice water flooded Maya's veins. Tommy's message was cryptic, but the warning was clear. Her investigation had been compromised somehow. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I need to go. There's been a family emergency." Alexander's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Is everything all right? Do you need help? A car? Anything?" The genuine worry in his voice made Maya's chest tighten with guilt. Here was a man offering his resources to help with a crisis that didn't exist, while she stood in his private sanctuary planning to expose corruption in his world. "I'll be fine. Thank you for tonight." It was enlightening. "Maya, wait." Alexander caught her hand as she turned to leave, his touch sending electricity up her arm. "Whatever's happening, you don't have to handle it alone." For a moment, Maya allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to tell him the truth about her real identity, her investigation, the growing conflict between her mission and her feelings. The fantasy lasted exactly 3 seconds before reality crashed back. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, extracting her hand with more regret than she cared to examine. The taxi ride back to Queens felt like traveling between 2 different planets. Maya stared out the window as Manhattan's glittering towers gave way to the more modest lights of her actual neighborhood, her mind racing with possibilities. What had Marcus discovered? How much did he know? And most critically, was her carefully constructed cover blown? She found Tommy waiting in the shadows outside her apartment building, his young face tight with anxiety. "I've been trying to reach you for hours," he said as they climbed the stairs to her modest studio. "Maya, there's something you need to know about Marcus, about the Golden Fork, about everything." Once inside her apartment, Tommy's story spilled out in a rush of nervous energy and suppressed fear. Marcus had been systematically skimming from employee wages, falsifying health insurance records, and taking kickbacks from suppliers for years. But more dangerous than the financial crimes was his method of maintaining silence, a network of threats, blackmail, and calculated intimidation that kept workers too frightened to speak up. "He knows you've been asking questions," Tommy said, pacing Maya's small living room like a caged animal. "Someone told him about your conversation with Carmen last week, about you taking pictures of the schedule board." Maya's blood turned to ice. She had been photographing evidence, but she'd been careful, professional, if Marcus was onto her. "There's more," Tommy continued. "I heard him on the phone tonight, talking to someone about handling the Rodriguez situation, before it became a bigger problem. Maya, I think he's planning to frame you for something, get you arrested or deported or—" "I'm not undocumented," Maya said automatically, then caught herself. The lie came so easily now. She sometimes forgot which parts of her story were true. Tommy's revelation changed everything. Her investigation was blown, her cover compromised, and her safety potentially at risk. But more than that, her growing relationship with Alexander was now tainted by the knowledge that she'd been lying to him from the very beginning. As Tommy left with promises to be careful and stay in touch, Maya sank onto her couch with the weight of impossible choices pressing down like a physical force. She could abandon the investigation, disappear back into her real life as a successful attorney, and leave the Golden Fork's workers to fend for themselves. Or she could push forward, risk exposure, and potentially lose everything, including whatever was growing between her and Alexander. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "I hope your family emergency resolves well. Know that whatever you need, I'm here." Maya stared at the message until the words blurred, torn between the man she was falling for and the mission she'd dedicated her life to completing. Tomorrow would demand decisions that could change everything, but tonight, all she could do was sit in her small apartment and wonder how love and duty had become such irreconcilable enemies. Maya arrived at the Golden Fork the next evening with the hyper-vigilant awareness of someone walking into a trap. Every shadow seemed suspect, every colleague's glance potentially hostile. Marcus's usual position behind the host station felt like a sniper's nest, his pale eyes tracking her movements with predatory focus. "Rodriguez," his voice cut through the pre-dinner bustle like a blade. "My office now." The summons she'd been dreading had arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Maya followed Marcus through the maze of tables, past kitchen staff who avoided eye contact, past servers who suddenly found urgent tasks elsewhere. The walk felt like a funeral march, Marcus's office was a shrine to mediocrity disguised as management, motivational posters fighting for wall space with health department certificates, a desk buried under invoices and scheduling sheets that told stories Maya was only beginning to understand. "Sit," Marcus commanded, settling behind his desk with the satisfaction of a man who believed he held all the cards. Maya remained standing. "What's this about?" "Oh, I think you know exactly what this is about." Marcus opened a manila folder with theatrical precision. "Maya Rodriguez, age 26, supposedly enrolled at Columbia University. Supposedly working here to pay for school." He paused, savoring the moment like fine wine. "Except there's no record of a Maya Rodriguez in Columbia's current student directory. No financial aid applications. No class registrations. No tuition payments. Strange, don't you think?" Maya's mind raced through possible explanations, cover stories, ways to salvage a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond control. But Marcus wasn't finished. "What I find even more interesting," he continued, pulling out additional documents, "is the Maya Rodriguez who graduated from NYU Law School 3 years ago, the one who works for Brennan and Associates, specializing in employment law and workers' rights litigation." The folder's contents spilled across his desk like accusations, copies of her bar certification, employment records, even a newspaper clipping from a successful wrongful termination case she'd won last year. Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet as her carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. "The question is," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with obvious satisfaction, "what's a successful attorney doing pretending to be a struggling student in my restaurant? And more importantly, what am I going to do about it?" Maya forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, drawing on years of courtroom experience to project confidence she didn't feel. "What do you want?" "Marcus." Smart girl. Straight to negotiations. Marcus's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear. Tonight. Permanently. No dramatic exits. No tearful goodbyes to your fellow workers. You simply stop showing up. And if I refuse, then I make some phone calls to the State Bar Association about an attorney engaging in fraudulent misrepresentation, to Immigration Services about a potential identity theft case, to certain clients who might be very interested to know their favorite restaurant has been infiltrated by a lawyer with questionable ethics." The threats hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Maya felt the familiar surge of courtroom adrenaline, the sharp clarity that came when everything was on the line. "You're making a mistake, Marcus." "Am I?" He leaned forward, his pale eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're the one who's been lying for months, gathering information under false pretenses, probably planning some kind of lawsuit that could destroy this establishment." Maya had to admire his instincts. He was wrong about her methods, but absolutely correct about her intentions. The Golden Fork's systematic exploitation of workers was exactly the kind of case that could make headlines and set legal precedents. "What makes you think anyone would believe your word against mine?" she asked, playing for time while her mind raced through options. "Oh, I won't need anyone to believe me." Marcus opened another folder, this one containing photographs. Maya with her camera phone, documenting schedule violations and cash transactions. "I've been watching you, Ms. Rodriguez, or should I call you counselor? These pictures, combined with your false identity, paint quite a picture of corporate espionage." The photographs were damning. But Maya noticed something Marcus had missed in his eagerness to gloat. The timestamp on the images showed they'd been taken from inside the restaurant, by someone with access to employee areas. Someone on staff was feeding him information. "Who's been helping you?" she asked. Marcus's satisfied smile faltered slightly. "That's not your concern." "Actually it is. Because whoever's been spying on me has also been documenting your illegal practices. Wage theft, falsified records, worker intimidation. They've seen it all. And when this comes to light, they'll be witnesses for the prosecution, not character references for your defense." For the first time since she'd entered his office, Marcus looked uncertain. Maya pressed her advantage. "Here's what I think happened. You discovered my real identity and panicked. Instead of quietly firing me and hoping I'd disappear, you decided to get aggressive. But in doing so, you've confirmed that the Golden Fork has something to hide, something significant enough to risk blackmailing an attorney. You have no proof of anything," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Don't I?" Maya pulled out her phone, scrolling to a recording app she'd kept running during their entire conversation. "I have proof of you threatening to file false reports with government agencies. I have evidence of your knowledge of systematic worker exploitation, And most importantly, I have your admission that you've been conducting surveillance on employees without their knowledge or consent. Marcus's face went pale as the implications sank in. Maya felt the familiar satisfaction of a well-executed legal maneuver, the moment when the opposing side realized they'd walked into a trap of their own making. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Complete cooperation with a full investigation into the Golden Fork's employment practices, full back pay for every worker who's been cheated, and your immediate resignation. You're insane if you think—" "I think you're going to do exactly what I say," Maya interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Because the alternative is criminal prosecution for fraud, wage theft, and a dozen other felonies that will put you in prison for years." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. His earlier swagger completely evaporated. Maya could see him calculating odds, weighing options, realizing that his attempt at intimidation had backfired spectacularly. "I need time to consider. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I file complaints with the Department of Labor, the State Attorney General's office, and every other agency with jurisdiction. Your choice is whether you want to be part of the solution or the primary defendant in a very public prosecution." Maya left Marcus's office with her heart pounding but her head clear. The confrontation had been dangerous, but it had also clarified everything. Her investigation was blown, but her case was solid. Now she just had to decide what to do about Alexander. The answer came sooner than expected. As she emerged from the office, she found him waiting by the bar, his gray eyes dark with concern. "Maya, is everything all right?" Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost when he asked me to wait. The sight of him, genuinely worried, protective, completely unaware of the deception she'd been maintaining, hit Maya like a physical blow. Everything she'd been feeling, everything she'd been trying to deny, crystallized in that moment. "We need to talk," she said, privately. 20 minutes later, they sat in Alexander's car in the Golden Forks parking lot, the familiar sounds of the restaurant muffled by luxury German engineering. Maya had spent the short walk preparing what to say, but now that the moment had arrived, words seemed inadequate. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," she began. Alexander's expression grew serious. "About what?" "About who I am. About why I'm really here." Maya took a breath, stepping off a cliff she couldn't see the bottom of. "My name is Maya Rodriguez, but I'm not a Columbia student. I'm an attorney. I've been working at the Golden Fork undercover, investigating employment law violations." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya watched Alexander's face cycle through confusion, realization, and something that might have been betrayal. "You're a lawyer," he said finally. "Yes. Working undercover in a restaurant where I'm a regular customer." "Yes. For how long?" 3 months. Alexander was quiet for another long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Was any of it real? Our conversations? The dinner? The gala? Was I just part of your investigation?" The question cut deeper than any of Marcus's threats. Maya saw the pain in Alexander's eyes, the vulnerability he was trying to hide behind carefully maintained composure. "It started that way," she admitted, "but it became real. More real than I ever expected or wanted. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to trust anything you've said?" Maya didn't have a good answer. The truth was complicated, messy, tangled up with emotions she'd never meant to feel, and commitments she'd made long before she knew Alexander Stone was more than just another entitled billionaire. "You're not," she said finally. "I've lied to you about fundamental things. I've used our relationship to gather information. I've violated your trust in ways that can't be easily forgiven." Alexander turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes searching her face for something she wasn't sure she could give him. "But I need you to understand," Maya continued, "that the work I'm doing, the investigation, it matters. Workers at the Golden Fork and dozens of other restaurants are being systematically exploited. They're being cheated out of wages, denied benefits, intimidated into silence. Someone has to speak for them, and that someone has to be you." "Yes," Maya said without hesitation, "because I have the skills, the resources, and the commitment to make a difference. Because walking away would mean abandoning people who have no other advocate." Alexander was quiet for a long time, his expression unreadable. Maya felt the weight of everything unsaid between them, the growing distance that her honesty had created rather than bridged. "I need time to process this," he said finally. Maya nodded, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I understand. Do Because I thought I was falling in love with someone who doesn't actually exist. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, all the more painful for being absolutely true. She had created a fictional version of herself, carefully crafted to be appealing while hiding everything that mattered most about who she really was. She does exist, Maya said quietly. The woman who challenged you about dignity, who believed in fighting for workers' rights, who enjoyed our conversations about books and philosophy. That was real. That was me. But not all of you. No, not all of me. Alexander started the car, and Maya understood that their conversation was over. As he drove her home in silence, she realized that exposing Marcus's crimes might be the easy part. Rebuilding trust with the man she'd fallen for while lying to him would be far more complicated. But as Maya looked out at the city lights blurring past, she knew she'd made the right choice. Some battles were worth fighting, even when victory came at a personal cost too high to calculate. The silence between Maya and Alexander stretched like a chasm over the following week. No calls, no texts, no unexpected appearances at the Golden Fork. Maya told herself this was for the best. She had work to do, a case to build, workers to protect. But the absence of his presence felt like a missing piece of her daily rhythm. A song with crucial notes stripped away, Marcus had chosen cooperation over prosecution. Though his resignation came with all the grace of a wounded animal, Maya worked with a team from the Department of Labor to document every violation. Every stolen hour, every falsified record. The scope of the systematic abuse was staggering. Dozens of workers owed thousands in back pay, health benefits denied through bureaucratic sleight of hand, overtime hours that disappeared from official records like morning mist. "This is bigger than just the Golden Fork," said Detective Sarah Chen, the investigator assigned to the case. "We're seeing patterns across multiple high-end establishments. Someone's been teaching restaurant managers how to exploit workers without leaving obvious evidence." Maya felt a chill of recognition. The sophistication of the scheme suggested coordination, planning, resources that went far beyond Marcus's limited imagination. This wasn't just individual greed. This was systematic, institutional, possibly connected to the very power structures she'd observed during her brief glimpse into Alexander's world. It was Tommy who provided the missing piece. Arriving at Maya's apartment on a rain-soaked Thursday evening with documents clutched against his chest like sacred artifacts. "I kept copies," he said, spreading papers across her coffee table with trembling hands. "When Marcus made me shred the old employment records, I kept copies of everything." The documents painted a damning picture. A network of restaurants all using identical methods to cheat workers, all managed by different people but following the same playbook. And at the center of it all, a consulting firm called Elite Service Solutions, owned by a shell company that traced back to some of Manhattan's most prominent families. "My God," Maya breathed, studying the corporate structures. "This isn't just the Golden Fork, it's dozens of restaurants, all part of the same system." Tommy nodded, his young face grave with the weight of what he'd discovered. "Maya, there's something else. About Mr. Stone." Maya's head snapped up. "What about him?" "I heard Marcus on the phone yesterday, talking to someone about the investigation. He mentioned Mr. Stone specifically. Said the boss wanted to know if Stone was involved, if he knew anything about what you were really doing." The boss. Whoever's running Elite Service Solutions. Marcus was scared. Maya, really scared. He kept saying he didn't know Stone was connected to you, that it wasn't his fault the investigation got so far. Maya felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. If Alexander was somehow connected to the consulting firm, if his interest in her had been calculated from the beginning. "There's more," Tommy continued, pulling out a photograph that looked like it had been taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Alexander leaving a downtown office building, briefcase in hand, his expression serious. Maya recognized the address. It was the same building that housed Elite Service Solutions. The photograph sat on Maya's table like an accusation, challenging everything she thought she knew about Alexander Stone. Had their entire relationship been an elaborate manipulation? Was his sudden interest in workers' rights a carefully calculated response to her investigation? Her phone rang, cutting through the spiral of doubt and suspicion. Alexander's name on the screen made her heart perform complicated gymnastics she had no right to feel. "Hello, Maya." His voice carried a formality that hadn't been there before, a careful distance that confirmed what she'd feared. Their conversation in the car had changed everything between them. "I was hoping we could meet. There are things we need to discuss." "About what?" "About the Golden Fork. About your investigation." About why I think we might be working toward the same goal. Maya glanced at the photograph on her table. At Tommy's worried face, at the evidence of systematic exploitation spread across every surface of her small apartment. Trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Where? My office, tomorrow evening. After hours, I'll send a car. The line went dead before Maya could respond. She stared at the phone, trying to decipher the subtext of a conversation that felt like negotiations between opposing armies. You're not actually going, are you? Tommy asked, having overheard enough to understand the stakes. Maya looked at the photograph again, at Alexander's serious expression, as he left the building that housed her investigation's primary target. Every instinct she'd developed as an attorney screamed warnings about walking into what could be an elaborate trap. Yes, she said finally, I am. Because beneath the fear, beneath the doubt and the evidence of possible betrayal, Maya needed to know the truth about Elite Service Solutions, about Alexander's involvement, about whether anything they'd shared had been real. The next evening found Maya in the back of a sleek black car, watching Manhattan's lights blur past while her mind raced through possibilities. Alexander's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower that pierced the sky like a steel needle, its windows glowing against the darkness like a beacon or a warning. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending into another dimension. When the doors opened, Maya stepped into a space that defined understated elegance, polished floors that reflected subtle lighting, artwork that belonged in museums, and windows that offered a god's-eye view of the city below. Alexander stood with his back to the elevator, silhouetted against the panoramic cityscape. Tonight he wore a simple black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the careful way he held himself, like a man expecting bad news. Thank you for coming, he said without turning around. Did I have a choice? That made him turn, his gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch despite everything. You always have a choice, Maya. That's one of the things I admire about you. The past tense in his statement felt like a door closing. Maya forced herself to focus on why she was here, on the photograph in her purse, and the questions that demanded answers. Tommy saw you leaving a building downtown yesterday, the same building that houses Elite Service Solutions. Alexander was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, pulling out a thick folder that he set between them like a treaty waiting to be signed. Elite Service Solutions is a consulting firm that's been systematically teaching restaurant owners how to exploit workers while avoiding legal consequences, he said. They've been operating for 3 years, targeting high-end establishments, creating a network of wage theft and worker intimidation that spans dozens of businesses across the city. Maya felt her world tilt. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating them for the past 8 months. Alexander opened the folder, revealing documents that mirrored her own investigation, but went far deeper. Financial records, corporate structures, communications between Elite Service Solutions and their clients. My company has been funding an undercover operation to expose their network and build cases against every restaurant in their system. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. You've been investigating the same conspiracy I was. From the other direction, yes. We knew Elite Service Solutions was operating, but we couldn't identify their target restaurants without evidence from the inside. When you showed up at the Golden Fork, making waves, asking the right questions, Alexander paused, his expression complicated. I thought you might be connected to them somehow. It took weeks of investigation to discover you were working alone. Maya sank into a chair, her mind reeling. So when you started paying attention to me, I was trying to figure out if you were an ally or an enemy. But Maya, what happened between us, what I felt, that was never part of any investigation. She wanted to believe him. The evidence he'd shared, the depth of his own investigation, the obvious resources he'd dedicated to exposing the same crimes she'd been fighting. It all supported his story, but trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. Why should I believe you? She asked. How do I know this isn't another layer of deception? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes holding hers with an honesty that felt like vulnerability. Because I'm about to give you something that could destroy me if I'm wrong about who you really are. He pulled out another folder, this one containing documents that made Maya's breath catch. Financial records, showing payments from Alexander's personal accounts to legal aid organizations, workers' rights groups, immigration advocacy programs, grants funding education programs for restaurant workers, healthcare initiatives, legal defense funds. I've been fighting this battle for years, Alexander said quietly, privately, because I learned early that public displays of conscience make you a target. But I've been funding the fight against systematic worker exploitation since I inherited my wealth. Maya studied the documents, her trained eye recognizing the authenticity of the financial records, the scope of the giving, the careful anonymity that had kept Alexander's involvement hidden from public view. Why? She asked. Why risk so much to help people you don't even know? Alexander moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. Because I know what it's like to be powerless. When my parents died, I inherited money but not wisdom, resources but not purpose. I spent years learning that wealth without responsibility is just elaborate isolation. He turned back to face her, his expression vulnerable in ways she'd never seen before. And because I know what it's like to be seen only for what I can provide, never for who I actually am. Those workers, they're fighting for dignity, for recognition that their lives have value beyond their economic utility. I understand that fight more than you might think. Maya felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the defensive barrier she'd erected since discovering his connection to elite service solutions. This was the man she'd fallen for. Complex, contradictory, carrying wealth like a burden while using it as a tool for justice. So what now? She asked. Alexander returned to his desk, pulling out one final document, a legal brief that took Maya's breath away. It was a comprehensive prosecution strategy against elite service solutions and every restaurant in their network, complete with evidence lists, witness statements, and legal precedents. Now we finish what we both started, he said. Together. The war room they created in Alexander's office over the following week resembled something between a legal clinic and a military command center. Whiteboards covered with connection diagrams competed for wall space with evidence boxes, while multiple laptops displayed financial records, corporate structures, and testimony from workers brave enough to speak. Maya found herself working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and righteous anger, coordinating with investigators, attorneys, and labor advocates across the city. The scope of Elite Service Solutions' operation was staggering. 37 restaurants, over 400 workers systematically cheated out of wages, healthcare benefits, and basic dignity. We're not just looking at civil violations anymore, Detective Chen announced during one of their evening strategy sessions. The RICO unit is interested. This level of coordination, the interstate money transfers, the systematic nature, it qualifies as organized crime. Alexander, who had been studying financial projections at his desk, looked up with grim satisfaction. How long to build a federal case? 6 months? Minimum. But we need more evidence, more witnesses willing to testify. These people are scared, and they have good reason to be. Maya knew exactly what Chen meant. 3 workers who'd initially agreed to cooperate had suddenly changed their minds, citing mysterious family emergencies or new job opportunities that required immediate relocation. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. They're being intimidated, Maya said, pacing the office with restless energy. Threatened, bribed, or both. We need to find a way to protect potential witnesses. I've been thinking about that, Alexander said, pulling up a document on his laptop. What if we provided immediate financial support? Relocation assistance, legal protection, guaranteed employment with legitimate restaurants? That could work, Maya agreed. But something nagged at her. The operation was moving too smoothly, their evidence gathering proceeding without the obstacles she'd expected from such a sophisticated criminal network. It was Tommy who brought news that confirmed her fears. He arrived at Alexander's office on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, his young face pale with anxiety. They know, he said without preamble. Elite Service Solutions knows about the investigation. They're moving money, destroying records, preparing to shut down operations. Maya felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. How do you know? Marcus called me. He's terrified. Says they're blaming him for the leak, threatening to frame him for embezzlement. He wants to cut a deal, provide evidence in exchange for protection. Alexander and Maya exchanged glances. Marcus as a cooperating witness could provide the insider testimony they needed, but it also meant their investigation was blown. There's more, Tommy continued. Marcus says there's going to be a meeting tomorrow night. All the restaurant managers, the elite service executives, everyone involved in the network. They're panicking, trying to coordinate their response before the federal investigation gets too far. Maya's mind raced with possibilities. Where? The Meridian Club, private dining room, after hours, The Meridian Club was Manhattan's most exclusive private establishment, the kind of place where the city's power brokers gathered to make deals that never appeared in public records. It was also virtually impenetrable to outside surveillance. "We need to get someone inside that meeting," Maya said. "Impossible," Alexander replied. "The Meridian Club's security is military grade. Even if we could get past their screening, one unfamiliar face would be immediately noticed." Maya studied the evidence boards covering Alexander's walls, her mind working through the impossible logistics of penetrating a closed meeting of criminal conspirators. Then an idea formed. Dangerous, reckless, but potentially brilliant. What if the unfamiliar face wasn't unfamiliar? She asked slowly. Alexander frowned. "What do you mean? You're a member of the Meridian Club, aren't you?" "Yes, but Maya, if you're suggesting..." "I'm suggesting that Alexander Stone, concerned member of Manhattan's business elite, might have legitimate reasons to attend a private meeting about restaurant industry challenges." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. What Maya was proposing was dangerous on multiple levels. If Elite Service Solutions suspected Alexander's involvement in the investigation, walking into their emergency meeting could be suicide. "Absolutely not," Alexander said firmly. "The risk is too high. The risk of doing nothing is higher," Maya countered. "They're destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses, preparing to disappear. This might be our only chance to get the testimony we need to stop them. Maya, these people have killed to protect their operation. 3 workers who tried to come forward have disappeared. I won't let you walk into that kind of danger." The protective note in his voice sent warmth through Maya's chest, but it also strengthened her resolve. "I won't be walking in. You will. With recording equipment, with backup, with a plan." They argued for another hour, Alexander insisting the plan was too dangerous, Maya pointing out that it might be their only chance to gather the evidence needed to bring down the entire network. Finally, Detective Chen settled the debate with law enforcement pragmatism. "We'll do it," she said. "But with full surveillance, backup teams, and extraction protocols, the moment anything seems wrong, we pull everyone out." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Alexander was fitted with recording equipment so sophisticated it was virtually undetectable. While backup teams positioned themselves around the Meridian Club, Maya coordinated from a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Alexander enter the exclusive club. "Audio check," she said into her headset. "Clear," came Alexander's voice through her earpiece. Proceeding to the private dining room, Maya stared at the bank of monitors showing feeds from traffic cameras and building security systems, trying to maintain visual contact as Alexander moved through the club's elegant interior. The Meridian Club represented old Manhattan power, leather and mahogany, crystal and gilt, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost over 100-year-old whiskey. "I'm outside the dining room." Alexander's voice was barely audible. "I can hear voices inside, moving to position." What happened next unfolded with nightmare clarity. Maya watched the monitors as black SUVs surrounded the Meridian Club, as armed men in tactical gear moved through the building with military precision. "Alexander, get out," she said urgently. "Something's wrong. You're walking into a trap." But it was too late. Through the audio feed, Maya heard Alexander's sharp intake of breath, followed by a voice she recognized with sinking dread. "Mr. Stone, how unexpected to see you here." Elite Service Solutions hadn't called an emergency meeting to coordinate their response to the investigation. They'd called it to eliminate the investigators. Maya watched in horror as the monitors went dark one by one, as her communication with Alexander dissolved into static. The van's radio crackled with urgent reports from backup teams. Shots fired, federal agents down, the Meridian Club under lockdown. In that moment, Maya realized that her investigation had cost her more than her cover or her safety. It might have cost her the man she'd fallen in love with while lying to him, the man who'd chosen to trust her despite having every reason not to. The thought of losing Alexander to a trap she'd helped design was more than Maya could bear. But as she watched emergency vehicles race toward the Meridian Club, she also knew that running toward danger was the only choice that mattered. Some battles demanded everything, including the possibility of losing what you fought hardest to protect. The Meridian Club had been transformed into a war zone. Maya crouched behind a police barricade 3 blocks away, watching smoke rise from the exclusive establishment like offerings to angry gods. Emergency vehicles painted the night in strobing red and blue, while tactical teams moved through the shadows with predatory efficiency. "Status report," Detective Chen demanded through the radio static. her voice tight with professional control barely containing personal fury. "Building secured," came the response. "Multiple casualties. Unknown number of suspects in custody. No sign of our UC asset." Maya's heart stopped. Alexander, their undercover asset, was missing. "He's got to be in there," she said, starting toward the club before Chen's hand caught her arm. "Maya, don't. We don't know what we're walking into." But Maya was already moving, her attorney's mind cataloging legal precedents while her heart screamed with primal fear. She'd spent months lying to Alexander, weeks building trust after her deception, and now he might be dead, because she'd convinced him to walk into a trap. The Meridian Club's interior looked like something from a war movie. Overturned furniture, shattered crystal, blood-staining priceless Persian rugs. Maya followed the tactical team through rooms she'd only imagined, past oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. Toward the private dining room where Alexander had last been heard, they found the dining room empty except for evidence of violence. Chairs overturned, a conference table splintered by gunfire, and Alexander's recording equipment scattered across the floor like electronic confetti. "Blood trail," one of the officers announced, pointing toward a service corridor Maya hadn't known existed. They followed the trail through servants' passages hidden behind false walls, down stairs that descended into the building's foundation. Maya's mind raced with architectural impossibilities, until she realized they weren't in the Meridian Club anymore. They were in the tunnels that connected Manhattan's oldest buildings, passages created during Prohibition, and maintained by people who valued privacy above legality. The trail led to a heavy steel door marked with warnings in multiple languages. Beyond it, Maya could hear voices. Multiple speakers engaged in what sounded like heated negotiation. "Told you Stone was a problem from the beginning," a woman's voice was saying. "His bleeding heart philanthropy, his questions about restaurant workers. We should have eliminated him months ago." Maya recognized the voice. Victoria Ashford, society matron and board member of half a dozen charitable foundations. The same woman who'd praised Maya's passion for workers' rights at Alexander's charity gala. "Killing Stone would have raised too many questions," replied a man's voice, that Maya identified as Marcus's former boss at Elite Service Solutions. "Better to turn him, make him complicit in our operations." "Turn him how?" Victoria demanded. "By making him fall for our investigator, by convincing him that the lawyer was working alone, that helping her would serve justice. Stone's been funding opposition to our operations for months. Better to redirect that energy than destroy it." Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet. They knew. Elite Service Solutions had known about her investigation from the beginning, had manipulated both her and Alexander into a relationship designed to control their actions. "Where is he now?" Victoria asked. "Secure, sedated. Once we've eliminated the federal task force, we'll decide how to handle him permanently." Maya's training took over, suppressing emotion in favor of tactical thinking. Alexander was alive but captive. The federal investigation was compromised. Elite Service Solutions wasn't just a criminal conspiracy. It was a sophisticated operation with resources and connections that went far beyond restaurant management. The tactical team prepared to breach the steel door, but Maya held up a hand, gesturing for them to wait. Through the crack beneath the door, she could see light, movement, shadows that suggested multiple people in a large space. "How many?" she whispered to the team leader. "Unknown. Could be anywhere from 5 to 20. Maya made a decision that would have horrified her rational mind if she'd given it time to think. "I'm going in first." "Absolutely not. They know me. They've been manipulating me for months. If anyone can get close enough to gather intelligence about their operation, it's me." Before anyone could stop her, Maya was moving toward the door, her hands raised in apparent surrender, her mind racing through every negotiation tactic she'd learned in law school and refined in courtrooms. The steel door opened into a space that defied belief, an underground conference room equipped with technology that belonged in a spy movie. Multiple screens displayed financial data, surveillance feeds, and what looked like real-time monitoring of federal law enforcement communications. At the center of it all sat Alexander, zip-tied to a chair, but conscious, his gray eyes meeting hers with a mixture of relief and warning. Blood stained his shirt, but he was alive, alert, and clearly planning something behind his deceptively calm expression. "Ms. Rodriguez," Victoria Ashford said without surprise, as if Maya's arrival had been anticipated. "How thoughtful of you to join us." "Let him go," Maya said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Your problem is with me, not him." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Our problem, my dear, is that you've both outlived your usefulness. But since you're here, perhaps you'd like to understand exactly how thoroughly you've been played. The next 10 minutes shattered every assumption Maya had made about her investigation. Elite Service Solutions wasn't just exploiting restaurant workers. They were running a human trafficking operation, using restaurants as fronts for moving people across state lines, exploiting undocumented workers who couldn't report crimes without risking deportation. Maya's investigation hadn't been an inconvenience to be managed. It had been a useful tool for identifying potential witnesses who needed to be silenced. Her relationship with Alexander hadn't been an unexpected complication. It had been carefully orchestrated by people who understood that the best way to control a crusading attorney was to give her a romantic distraction. Every conversation you've had, every feeling you've developed, every choice you've made, all of it has served our purposes, Victoria continued with obvious satisfaction. You've been very helpful in identifying workers willing to testify, potential witnesses who needed relocation. Maya thought of the workers who'd disappeared, the families who'd suddenly moved away, the testimonies that had vanished like morning mist. Her investigation hadn't just failed to protect them, it had marked them for elimination. But now, Victoria said, pulling out a pistol with casual elegance, your usefulness has ended. The gunshot that followed came not from Victoria's weapon, but from the steel door, as Detective Chen's tactical team breached the room with overwhelming force. Maya threw herself toward Alexander as chaos erupted around them. Muzzle flashes, shouted commands, the distinctive crack of breaking electronics, as Elite Service Solutions' high-tech operation dissolved into burning fragments. When the smoke cleared, Victoria Ashford was dead, along with 3 of her associates. 2 others were in custody, their expensive suits torn and bloodied, and Maya was kneeling beside Alexander's chair, cutting his restraints with hands that shook from adrenaline and relief. "Are you okay?" she asked, checking the blood on his shirt. "I am now," Alexander replied, his voice rough but steady. "Maya, what they said about manipulating our relationship. I know. We'll deal with that later." Maya helped him to his feet, acutely aware of the federal agents securing evidence around them. "Right now, we need to make sure this operation is completely dismantled." But even as she spoke, Maya knew that the real reckoning would come later, when they had time to examine how much of their relationship had been genuine and how much had been careful manipulation by people who understood that the heart could be the most effective weapon of all. The coffee in Maya's apartment had gone cold hours ago, but she hadn't noticed. Spread across every surface, her dining table, coffee table, even the floor, were documents that painted a picture of corruption so vast, it defied comprehension. 3 days had passed since the raid on the Meridian Club, and each new piece of evidence revealed another layer of Elite Service Solutions' criminal empire. Alexander sat across from her, his laptop balanced on his knees. Methodically cross-referencing financial records with restaurant locations, the cut on his forehead from the kidnapping had healed into a thin line, but Maya noticed how he favored his left shoulder, how his usually perfect posture carried the weight of recent trauma. They worked in careful silence, their professional collaboration a masterclass in avoiding the personal minefield that lay between them. Every shared glance carried the weight of questions neither was ready to ask. Every accidental touch when reaching for documents crackled with unresolved tension. "Maya," Alexander's voice cut through her concentration. "Look at this." She moved to peer over his shoulder, catching a hint of his cologne. Expensive, familiar, dangerous to her equilibrium. On his screen was a bank routing number that made her blood freeze. "That's the account that paid for the surveillance on federal investigators," she said. "The one that funded the hit squad at the Meridian Club. And it traces back to Ashford Holdings, Victoria's personal investment firm." Alexander's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up corporate structures that revealed a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. "But Maya, look at the timing of these transfers." Maya studied the financial records, her attorney's mind cataloging patterns and connections. The payments to Elite Service Solutions hadn't started 3 years ago when the worker exploitation began. They went back nearly a decade, to when Alexander's parents had died in that car accident. "My God," she whispered. "They didn't just target you recently. They've been watching you since you inherited your wealth." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that spoke of pieces falling into place. "The accident. My parents' car accident. Victoria was the one who called to tell me about it. She was there at the hospital, helped with funeral arrangements. Introduced me to financial advisors. You think she was involved in their deaths? I think Victoria Ashford spent 10 years positioning herself to control the stone fortune. One way or another, Alexander closed the laptop with careful precision, either by marrying me off to someone she could manipulate or by ensuring I remained isolated and dependent on her guidance. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air seeping through her apartment's old windows. And when you started showing interest in workers' rights, when you began funding opposition to systematic exploitation, she realized control wasn't enough. She needed elimination. The revelation should have brought satisfaction. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. More evidence for the federal prosecutors building their case. Instead, Maya felt overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy they'd stumbled into, the decades of manipulation and murder disguised as Manhattan's social connections. Her phone rang, cutting through their grim revelation. Detective Chen's name on the screen promised either breakthrough or catastrophe. Rodriguez. Maya answered. We have a problem, Chen said without preamble. 3 of our key witnesses disappeared overnight. Tommy Brennan, Carmen Vasquez, and Maria Santos. All gone, along with their families. Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Disappeared how? Clean apartments. No signs of struggle. No forwarding addresses. But Maya, there's more. We found evidence that they were contacted by someone claiming to represent the Stone Foundation, offering relocation assistance and new identities. Alexander's foundation. Maya's eyes met his across the small apartment, seeing her own horror reflected in his expression. Someone was using Alexander's legitimate witness protection efforts as cover for eliminating testimony. How is that possible? Maya asked. Alexander's been working with us. His foundation's records are compromised, Chen interrupted. Someone with access to Stone Foundation resources has been operating independently, using Foundation credentials to approach witnesses. We don't know if it's an inside job or if the Foundation's security has been breached. Maya ended the call with hands that shook slightly. Tommy, earnest, brave Tommy who'd risked everything to expose Marcus's crimes, was gone. Carmen, who'd worked at the Golden Fork for 12 years and finally found the courage to speak up about wage theft. Maria, whose testimony about working 16-hour shifts without breaks could have sent people to prison for decades. It's my fault, Alexander said quietly. My foundation, my resources being used to silence the people we're trying to protect. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? Alexander stood abruptly, pacing Maya's small living room like a caged predator. Victoria had access to everything. My personal accounts, foundation records, business connections. She's been planning this for years, Maya. Every charity gala, every board meeting, every conversation about social responsibility. She was gathering intelligence, learning how to turn my own resources against me. Maya watched him struggle with the weight of betrayal. Understanding on a visceral level, the guilt of realizing your good intentions had been weaponized against innocent people. She'd felt the same crushing responsibility when she learned her investigation had marked workers for elimination. So what do we do? She asked. Alexander stopped pacing, his gray eyes meeting hers with determination that reminded her why she'd fallen for him in the first place. We finish this. All of it. Elite Service Solutions. The human trafficking network. Every person involved in Victoria's conspiracy. How our witnesses are gone. The federal case is compromised, and we don't even know who we can trust at this point. We use the one thing Victoria couldn't control or manipulate. Alexander moved to his laptop, pulling up files that Maya recognized as the Foundation's witness protection protocols. We use the truth. Over the next hour, Alexander outlined a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. Instead of hiding from the investigation's compromise, they would publicize it, calling a press conference to reveal not just Elite Service Solutions crimes, but the decades-long conspiracy to manipulate and control one of Manhattan's largest fortunes. You want to paint a target on your back, Maya said. Again, I want to make it impossible for them to operate in shadows. Victoria's dead, but her network is still out there. Other wealthy families involved in the conspiracy, federal agents who might be compromised, judges who've been bought. The only way to stop them is to drag everything into the light. Maya understood the logic, but she also understood the risks. Going public would make them both targets, would expose them to retaliation from people with resources and connections they could barely imagine. And if they come after us, then we face them together. Alexander's voice carried a note she hadn't heard before. Not just determination, but trust. Maya, I know our relationship started with deception. I know you lied about who you were, and I know my feelings for you might have been manipulated by people who understood exactly how to exploit them." Maya felt her chest tighten with familiar guilt and longing. "But what I feel now, in this moment, working beside you to fight for people who can't fight for themselves, that's real. That's choice, not manipulation." The declaration hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Maya looked at Alexander. Brilliant, vulnerable, offering partnership in the most dangerous fight of their lives, and realized that Victoria Ashford had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that love born from deception couldn't become genuine. She'd believed that manipulated emotions couldn't evolve into authentic choice. "Together," Maya agreed, reaching for Alexander's hand. "We finish this together." As they began planning their press conference, Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not just the familiar burn of professional determination, but the deeper satisfaction of fighting alongside someone who understood that some battles were worth everything, including the possibility of losing what you valued most. Victoria Ashford had spent decades playing chess with human lives, believing herself always 3 moves ahead, but she'd never anticipated that her pawns might choose to become players in their own game. 6 months after the press conference that had shattered Manhattan's social elite and sent shockwaves through federal law enforcement, Maya stood in the sunlit lobby of the Rodriguez Stone Center for Workers' Rights. Watching construction crews put finishing touches on what had once been the Golden Fork, the transformation was symbolic and practical. Where Marcus had once exploited workers, there was now a legal clinic providing free representation to restaurant employees across the city. Where the wealthy had dined in willful ignorance of systematic abuse, there were now conference rooms where workers could organize, learn their rights, and find their voices. "The final inspection passed this morning," Sophia announced, emerging from what had been the kitchen and was now a community meeting space. "We're officially ready to open," Maya smiled, remembering the passionate chef who'd worried about her friend getting involved with dangerous people. Sophia now served as the center's community outreach coordinator, using her networks in the restaurant industry to identify workers who needed help. "Tommy called," Sophia continued. "He and his family are doing well in Portland. New identities, new jobs. But he wanted you to know he started a support group for restaurant workers there. The witness protection program Alexander had developed after the federal investigation had saved dozens of lives. Though the cost of relocating families and providing new identities had been staggering, Maya sometimes wondered if Tommy missed New York, missed the community he'd left behind, but his safety was worth any sacrifice. "Maya," Alexander's voice drew her attention to the entrance, where he stood with Detective Chen and a man Maya didn't recognize. Older, expensive suit, the kind of careful grooming that suggested significant wealth. "This is District Attorney Morrison," Chen said as they approached. "He has news about the federal case." Morrison's expression was professionally neutral, but Maya caught a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. 43 indictments, including 2 sitting judges, 1 federal prosecutor, and 6 restaurant owners. The Elite Service Solutions Network has been completely dismantled. Maya felt a familiar surge of professional satisfaction. Convictions. 38 guilty pleas so far, with trials pending for the rest. The human trafficking charges alone will put most of them away for decades. Morrison paused, his expression growing more serious. "There's something else. We found evidence that Victoria Ashford was involved in your parents' death, Mr. Stone." Alexander's face went carefully blank, the way it always did when he was processing emotional information too complex for immediate reaction. Maya instinctively moved closer to him, a gesture of support that had become automatic over the months they'd spent rebuilding trust alongside their professional partnership. "Evidence," Alexander asked quietly. "Tampered brake lines, payoffs to the accident reconstruction team, falsified insurance reports. She arranged their murder to accelerate your inheritance and ensure you'd be emotionally dependent on her guidance." Morrison's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much human evil. "I'm sorry. I know this is difficult to hear." Maya watched Alexander absorb the confirmation of what they'd suspected, seeing the careful control he maintained over his expression. They'd learned to navigate his emotional processing together, the way he internalized trauma before examining it, the precise manner in which he rebuilt his worldview when fundamental assumptions were proven false. "Thank you for telling me," Alexander said simply. After Morrison and Chen left, Maya and Alexander walked through the center's completed spaces, their footsteps echoing in rooms that would soon be filled with workers seeking justice. The silence between them was comfortable now, seasoned by months of shared purpose and growing trust. "Are you okay?" Maya asked as they paused in the main conference room, sunlight streaming through windows that had once framed Marcus's exploitation. "I'm processing," Alexander replied, which was his way of asking for emotional space while accepting her presence. "It's strange, knowing for certain I grieved my parents years ago, made peace with the accident. Learning it was murder requires grieving them again, differently." Maya understood. Her own relationship with truth had become complicated over the months of investigation, testimony, and trials. Sometimes knowing more made healing harder, not easier. "There's something I want to show you," Alexander said, pulling out an envelope that bore the letterhead of his personal attorney. Maya opened it to find legal documents that made her breath catch. Alexander had transferred majority ownership of the Stone Foundation to her, along with controlling interest in several businesses, investment funds, and real estate holdings worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Alexander, I can't." "You can, and you should." His gray eyes held the quiet intensity she'd learned to associate with his most important decisions. "Maya, I've spent my entire adult life learning that inherited wealth without purpose is just elaborate isolation, but wealth directed toward justice, toward lifting up people who've been systematically oppressed, that becomes something meaningful." Maya stared at the documents, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering, not just money, but partnership in reshaping how wealth could be used as a tool for social change. "Besides," Alexander continued with a hint of the humor that had first surprised her at the Golden Fork, "I've discovered that I prefer earning things to inheriting them. The foundation I build with you, the work we do together, that's mine in ways my parents' money never was." Maya felt tears threaten, overwhelmed by the trust he was placing in her, the future he was envisioning for them both. "What if I make mistakes? What if I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility? Then you'll learn, adapt, and do better. The same way you've handled every challenge since the day you confronted me about treating Tommy with dignity." Alexander's voice carried absolute confidence. "Maya, you've already changed my life completely. Now we change the world, one worker at a time." The opening ceremony for the Rodriguez Stone Center drew crowds that overflowed onto the street. Workers from restaurants across the city mingled with legal advocates, federal investigators and journalists documenting the transformation of a place that had symbolized exploitation into a beacon of hope. Maya stood at the podium, looking out at faces that represented everything she'd dedicated her career to fighting for. In the front row, she spotted several workers from the original Golden Fork, including Carmen, who'd returned from witness protection to speak at the ceremony. 6 months ago, Maya began, this building housed a restaurant where workers were systematically cheated, intimidated, and exploited. Today, it represents something different, the possibility that ordinary people, working together, can defeat systems designed to keep them powerless. She spoke about the investigation, the federal case, the network of corruption that had been dismantled through the courage of workers willing to speak truth to power. But mostly, she spoke about the future, the legal clinic that would provide free representation, the education programs that would teach workers their rights, the organizing efforts that would help them find their collective voice. Change doesn't happen because wealthy benefactors decide to be generous, Maya concluded. Change happens because people refuse to accept injustice, even when fighting it requires everything they have. The applause was thunderous, but Maya's attention was focused on Alexander, who stood near the back of the crowd with an expression of pride and love that made her heart race. They'd traveled an impossible distance from their first confrontation at Table 7, through deception and betrayal, manipulation and danger, to arrive at something neither had expected. Later, after the crowds had dispersed and the media had departed, Maya and Alexander sat alone in the center's main conference room, sharing takeout Chinese food and planning their next initiatives. "The Portland expansion is approved," Alexander said, reviewing foundation documents on his laptop. "Tommy's group has identified 15 restaurants with potential violations. And Chicago. 3 law firms interested in partnership, plus commitments from 2 universities to provide student volunteers." Maya smiled, imagining the network they were building. Legal clinics in every major city, trained advocates in every immigrant community, a support system that could protect workers from the kind of systematic abuse they'd exposed in New York. "Maya," Alexander said, closing his laptop and fixing her with the intense focus that still made her breath catch. "There's one more thing I want to discuss." He pulled out a small velvet box that made Maya's heart perform gymnastics. she had no business feeling in a professional setting. I know our relationship started with deception. I know we've spent months rebuilding trust while fighting for other people's futures. But Maya, I want to fight for our future too. Maya stared at the ring. Elegant, simple, perfect. Understanding that this moment represented more than romantic commitment. It was Alexander choosing partnership over isolation, shared purpose over inherited obligation, love built through honest work over manipulation disguised as affection. Yes, she said, before he could finish the question she saw forming. Whatever you're asking, yes. The kiss that followed tasted like justice and possibility, like two people who'd learned that the most revolutionary act was choosing to trust each other completely. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Rodriguez Stone Foundation had grown beyond Maya's wildest imagination. Clinics in 12 cities, over 300 attorneys providing free representation, thousands of workers who'd recovered stolen wages and found their voices. The New York Center had become a model replicated across the country, proof that systematic change was possible when resources met passion. Maya stood in their new Manhattan headquarters, a gleaming office building that Alexander had purchased and renovated specifically for their expanding operations. Reviewing the quarterly report that would be released to the media tomorrow, Mrs. Stone, her assistant, called from the doorway. Your 2:00 appointment is here. Maya smiled at the title she was still getting used to. The wedding had been small, intimate, focused more on commitment than spectacle. They'd exchanged vows in the community garden behind the original Rodriguez Stone Center, surrounded by workers whose lives had been changed by their partnership. Send them in, Maya said, then paused as a familiar figure appeared in her doorway. Tommy Brennan, now 21 and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd survived actual danger, grinned at her with the same earnest enthusiasm that had first made her protective of him. Tommy, Maya stood, embracing him with genuine joy. What are you doing in New York? Law school interview at Columbia, he said proudly. But also, I wanted to ask you about something, about expanding the Portland clinic, maybe partnering with community colleges to provide legal education to restaurant workers. Maya listened as Tommy outlined his vision. Community-based legal education, worker-led organizing efforts, a new model that combined advocacy with grassroots empowerment. His ideas were sophisticated, thoughtful, born from someone who understood exploitation from personal experience, but had been given tools to fight back. What do you think? He asked. Would the foundation support something like that? Maya smiled, remembering the nervous teenager who'd been afraid to speak up about overtime violations. Tommy, I think you're going to change the world. As she walked him out, Maya caught sight of Alexander through the glass walls of his office. Deep in conversation with federal prosecutors about extending their model internationally, their work had grown beyond anything either had imagined, but the core remained the same. Two people who'd learned that love and justice were not opposing forces, but complementary ones. Victoria Ashford had been wrong about almost everything, but especially about this. She'd believed that relationships built on deception couldn't become authentic, that manipulated emotions couldn't evolve into genuine choice. She'd never understood that the strongest foundations were built not on perfect honesty, but on the willingness to rebuild trust after it had been broken, that the most revolutionary partnerships emerged not from easy compatibility, but from choosing to fight for the same causes despite different starting points. Maya Rodriguez and Alexander Stone had begun as adversaries in a restaurant where dignity was a luxury workers couldn't afford. They'd become partners in transforming how wealth and power could serve justice rather than perpetuate exploitation. But most importantly, they'd learned that sometimes the person who challenges everything you believe about yourself is exactly the person you need to become who you're meant to be. The revolution they'd started had begun with a simple premise. Everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position in society's hierarchy. The revolution they'd built would ensure that premise became reality. One worker, one workplace, one relationship at a time.